true strength of our nation comes not from the might of our arms or the scale of our wealth, but from the enduring power of our ideals.
History, despite its wrenching pain, cannot be unlived, but if faced with courage, need not be lived again.
That's the true genius of America, that America can change. What we've already achieved gives us hope for what we can and must achieve tomorrow.
All Americans from every walk of life unite in our resolve for justice and peace.
And so, my fellow Americans, ask not what your country can do for you, ask what you can do for your country. So even though we face the difficulties of today and tomorrow, I still have a dream.
Because being American is more than a pride we inherit. It's the past we step into and how we repair it.
On July 4th, 1776, America declared independence from Great Britain. The British government did not represent their needs. This led colonists to seek independence for the 13 colonies, pushing them to write the Declaration of Independence and enter the Revolutionary War. When the Declaration of Independence was written, America was seeking to govern itself. America wanted to unify the colonies against Great Britain. When writing the Declaration of Independence, our founding fathers prioritized personal independence. They believed people should have the right to make decisions without outside forces' interference. Since citizens weren't allowed to make their own decision under Great Britain's rule, this was prioritized when writing the Declaration of Independence. Without the desire for independence, the United States would not be the country it is today.
The notion of independence was first introduced into Congress on June 7th of 1776 by Richard Henry Lee. Shortly after, Thomas Jefferson was assigned to produce the first draft of the Declaration of Independence that same month. The Declaration of Independence has 3 parts, the third being the most important part, as it officially declares independence from Britain.
We, therefore, the representatives of the United States of America, solemnly publish and declare that these united colonies are, and of a right ought to be, free and independent states, that they are absolved from all allegiance to the British Crown, and that all political connection between them and the state of Great Britain is and ought to be totally dissolved, and that as free and independent states, they have full power to levy war, conclude peace, contract alliances, establish commerce, and to do all other acts and things which independent states may of right do.
This statement solidified the colonists' intentions and desires to be free from Great Britain.
Since the Declaration of Independence, America has gone through challenges and also seen success. One example of this is producing things in our own country. When America was first founded, many things were manufactured in the U.S. We relied on ourselves for production a lot more in early American history, for example, during the Industrial Revolution. This was a time when our economy was thriving. As a country, we produced more things in our own country and had more independence because of it. Later in history, companies began producing more things in other countries. Producing in other countries was cheaper and more efficient because you did not have to pay the workers as much. America has come to rely more and more on other countries to produce necessities, such as technology production. We rely on other nations to produce most of the parts for all the technology we use. Consider the cell phone. 90% of cell phone parts are produced outside the United States. Right now, nearly everything is made and assembled in other countries, such as China. By relying on others to produce necessities, we are unable to have the same amount of independence as a nation. Our citizens need goods produced by other countries, which takes away our ability to exist independently. Why should we be relying on others to do the things we need? We were founded on independence and have lost sight of this. If we began to produce more products in America, there would be more opportunities for higher-paying jobs for people. Bringing jobs and production back to America will allow us to return to our founding goal of independence and self-sufficiency.
In June last year, the Supreme Court of the United States overturned Roe v. Wade.
The overturning of Roe v. Wade was detrimental to independence, specifically reproductive independence.
Like with Roe v. Wade being overpassed, I don't really have that independence or that control over myself anymore.
After overturning a 5-decade-old decision that secured anyone that has the ability for pregnancy the right to obtain an abortion, our whole nation broke out in protest. The overturning of Roe v. Wade forced individuals to think about how they might maintain full control of their bodies, as well as what this means for younger generations. It took away our right to care for our bodies and put forth the values we believe that is best for us. We all have a body, therefore we should all have the ability to make choices about our bodies without the interference of others. However, because of the overturning of Roe v. Wade, the independent and individual right to make that decision has been completely neglected. Independence is about being able to make decisions for our own individual lives, for our own fulfillment, without the influence of the ones that surround us. Taking away that right for one to have an abortion goes against that. Not only does it bring in others to make a decision that doesn't impact them, but it gives them the right to decide what individuals do with their bodies. That brings in a complete disregard for independence, and we cannot accept that.
Although America has had its ups and downs, we want to inspire independence for future generations and let people have a voice in their own personal independence.
I think that American independence, what I want to see for the future of it, is that anyone should be able to live however they want to live without other people judging them or persecuting them for it.
Independence for future generations looks like having access to the same opportunities regardless of gender, religion, race, or identity, while also having control over their own bodies and choices.
Hopefully in our future, America will be able to allow people to pursue what they want and live the life that they choose to live rather than the life that they're forced to live or the life that they have to live because it's safest for them. I think that everyone deserves and hopefully will have the American dream that they were promised.
So we were founded on the idea of independence, and it's always been a very prevalent idea throughout history. Everything we do is kind of surrounding it. I'm hoping independence will become really important again and something that I see, and I feel like it's fading, and I hope that changes for the future.
For the future, we hope that we can return to our founding beliefs and make independence a more prominent value for future generations. We hope to learn from the mistakes we've made as a country and use them to better ourselves. We hope to learn from what we have succeeded in as a country in order to create a more independent future for Americans.
America. Say the U.S.
I would say the main one is America.
I think the U.S.
The world's largest superpower is America.
America is the world's superpower.
U.S.
America.
Yes.
Yes.
It has been for most of its time.
Yeah.
Yes. Yes.
Kind of. Many may think that the U.S. has been a world power for as long as it has been a country, which is simply not true. The U.S. was not considered a world power until quite recently. The first time America truly showed their power was their showing in World War I. George Washington believed that we should be our own nation, free from the influence of others. He said, "It is our true policy to steer clear of permanent alliances with any portion of the foreign world, as we are now at liberty to do it."
World War I started between Germany and Britain. The U.S. declared they would stay neutral and not choose a side. This did not stop the U.S. from trying to make a profit from the war. The U.S. started selling guns and ammo to both sides. This boosted America's ability to mass-produce weapons which would later benefit them in the war. In 1917, Germany sent a telegram to Mexico called the Zimmermann Note. The Zimmermann Note was proposing to Mexico that if they joined Germany in the war, they would give them U.S. land in return. Unfortunately for Germany, Britain would intercept the telegram and pass the message on to the U.S. When President Wilson heard of the note, he was very angry. His first move was to go to Congress and propose a declaration of war. Congress agreed and decided to sign the declaration. The U.S. was able to become an actual world power was because of the Industrial Revolution and the impacts it had.
Factories converted from peacetime production. In 1 year alone, they will turn out 670,000 machine guns, over 10 billion rounds of small arms ammunition.
The Industrial Revolution started with factories, and for the first time, we started producing on a mass scale.
The ship is launched exactly 4 days, 15 hours, and 29 minutes after its keel swings into place. These factories will produce at the rate of more than 100,000 military aircraft a year.
This change to America's economy is one of the only reasons we were able to become the world superpower.
Although the U.S. showed their world power in World War I, World War II solidified the U.S. as a world superpower. World War II started with Hitler being elected into power for Germany. He began to expand Germany all over Europe. The U.S. did not believe in getting involved in World War II until the Japanese bombed Pearl Harbor in 1941. The Japanese believed that if they bombed Pearl Harbor, they would take out the American fleet and buy themselves time in the Pacific and southeast parts of Asia. The U.S. declared war and entered World War II after the Pearl Harbor bombing in 1941. Once the U.S. declared war, they sent troops to the beaches of Normandy to attack the Germans. Germany surrendered on May 7, 1945, because Hitler died April 30th. With Hitler dead, they had no other recourse, so they had to surrender. In early August, the U.S. truly showed their power by dropping 2 atom bombs on Japan, forcing Japan to surrender and ending World War II. They killed over 100,000 people in the cities Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Since the end of World War II, the U.S. has been seen as a world power through the Cold War, War on Terror, and others.
After being victorious in World War II, the U.S. and the Soviet Union were both viewed as world powers. This was the start of a Cold War, a combination of proxy wars, the space race, espionage, and propaganda. These are all events that were viewed as a race for world power. In 1962, the Soviet Union placed nuclear bombs in Cuba. This was a huge threat to America, so the U.S. put a naval blockade around Cuba, stopping the Soviet Union from reaching Cuba. People began to find out about the missiles in Cuba, and it installed fear in Americans. So, America proposed a trade that they would take their missiles out of Turkey, and Russia would take theirs out of Cuba. The Soviet Union agreed, but the U.S. didn't tell people that they took their missiles out of Turkey.
The space race ended when the U.S. landed on the moon in 1969. This solidified America's world power even more.
It's one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind.
After these events, the Soviet Union collapsed and started to rebuild into Russia.
As of right now, the U.S. is still seen as a world superpower, but will we still be seen as one in the future? China has begun to challenge the U.S. as a world power. China's trade routes have grown and improved immensely since they passed the Belt and Road Initiative. The Belt and Road Initiative is a network of highways, energy networks, and streamlined border crossings. They have investments with 150 countries as of right now. The Chinese military is constantly growing, which as of now is the biggest threat to America's global power. China is also estimated to quadruple its nuclear weapons by 2035. All of these factors combined could threaten America's position as the global superpower. Regarding the future of our country, Barack Obama says, "There is a pervasive unease in the world, a sense that the very forces that have brought us together have created new dangers and made it difficult for any single nation to insulate itself from global forces." All of these events have made America the world power it is today. As a country, we will strive to keep our world power in the future.
America and Japan. Back-to-back World War champs, America, baby.
Brazil, because of Neymar. America, because we keep growing more and more.
Hi, I'm Chris McAvoy, one of the founders here at SAGE. I teach the seniors, I teach history, human ecology. Rugged individualism is, I think, one of the key aspects or centers of American identity, and has been for a long time. I think fascinatingly, we're really at a point where we're questioning it, challenging it, pushing against it in the past, I don't know how long, 30, 40, 50 years. I think recently pushing against it hard and seeing maybe it's limiting, maybe it doesn't capture it. But I think when we think of sort of the mythos of America, that sort of like rugged cowboy out on the range, is still in our psyche. And again, when people are fighting against it hard, they're trying to bring up other images. But it's still a major image that has to be countered and dealt with because it's so ingrained in a sense of who we are, or a sense of what it means to be American.
Many people throughout American history have embodied the spirit of individualism. These people stood out by going where others had not gone before, even when it required an inordinate amount of bravery. The first European explorers to embody this were willing to leave everything behind to create a new life for themselves. Of course, life in North America was anything but easy. They faced countless hardships like disease, cold, and famine. Yet despite all this, the promise of being able to chart their own course propelled them forward. So they sailed the sea and arrived in North America. For all its challenges, the New World offered them something that the Old World simply couldn't match: an opportunity to build a new society. By the 18th century, the individualistic ethos of the early explorers had evolved into a fully fledged culture of its own. Then, being more independently minded, the colonists insisted a significant degree of autonomy from Great Britain. When King George III refused to grant them this autonomy, the American Revolution was born. Instigated by the Declaration of Independence, a veritable individualist manifesto, the revolution ushered in a new nation, the United States of America. We took on one of the greatest armies in the world at the time and eventually persevered and won. Though the system of government created by the Founding Fathers had many flaws, it was deeply rooted in a philosophy of political individualism enshrining people's rights to live their lives as they see fit.
Rugged individualism played a major role in the Western expansion movement. Western migration gained traction in the 1800s, and the gold rush continued this migration, beginning in 1848. The gold rush brought over 300,000 immigrants. This hard journey brought opportunity and success in our world. The immigrants were willing to go through this journey and were willing to go out and persevere. Because of this, America came out with a stronger and more successful economy. In 1848, the Donner Party began their own journey west. The Donner Party is an example of grit, self-reliance, and perseverance. They were a group of American pioneers that migrated west. The Donner Party decided to take a shorter route through eastern Utah, but the route actually took them 18 days longer than it should have. The pioneers ran into a blizzard that left the Sierras with a bunch of snow, so the Donner Party had to retreat at a nearby lake and wait. Most of their supplies had already been lost on the trail, and it wasn't long before they went into starvation. This ended up into 2 of the members of the Donner Party having to be murdered for food. Out of the 81 pioneers that migrated west, only 45 made it to California. Those 45 individuals represent rugged individualism in America.
In the United States of America, our economic system promotes rugged individualism. Individuals own all of the businesses instead of the government. America encourages entrepreneurship. It allows one to work their way up in wealth and class. Not everyone makes it, but the people who persevere and push through every obstacle do. Depending on how hard you work for yourself, no matter where you start, you could move up in wealth and society. Maybe you could even become president. Thomas Jefferson and Jimmy Carter were both peanut farmers, and they made their way up to president of our country. Abraham Lincoln, who abolished slavery, and Harry Truman, who won the U.S. World War II, both grew up poor and worked their way up to the top.
So the role of rugged individualism in the future is a really open question to me. I think we're at a key crux right now. I could see a future where we talk about it in history books, like, this used to be a key selling point for America, and then we built this diverse, multi-ethnic society, and we realized that was a mythos, a sort of lie we were telling ourselves. I can also see that, there's that saying about gun rights where it's like you can pry the gun out of my cold dead hands. Like, I can imagine a side of American values wanting to hold on to that rugged individualism, for a long time. And so I don't know where it's going to go.
If they have ascended high, they have built their own ladder. From the depths of poverty, such as these have often come. From the heartless pavements of large and crowded cities, barefooted, homeless, and friendless, they have come. From hunger, rags, and destitution, they have come. Motherless and fatherless, they have come and may come.
Ladies and gentlemen, accept my thanks for your patient attention. I will detain you no longer. If by statement, argument, sentiment, or example, I have awakened in any a sense of the dignity of labor or the value of manhood, or have stirred in any mind a courageous resolution to make one more effort towards self-improvement and higher usefulness, I have not spoken altogether in vain, and your patience is justified.
Here comes the money.
Here we go. Money talk.
Here comes the money. Money, money, money.
Dollar, dollar. Dollar, dollar. Ching, ching, bling, bling. Got the chatter. You ain't talking money, then you're talking no matter.
Capitalism is an economic and political system in which a country's trade, industry, and capital goods are controlled by private individuals and corporations in an open and free market.
Since the dawn of colonial America, there have been elements of capitalism ingrained in our country. Capitalism came over on the very first ship that landed in the Americas. The first colonists were sent to America by the Virginia Joint Stock Company to find gold and other treasure they could sell for profits. When they didn't find treasure, they simply moved on to growing tobacco and selling it. While this was profitable for the colonists, it was at the cost of Native American people and their land. The American economy continued to grow due to capitalism in the mid-1800s. A large part of the growth during this time can be attributed to labor from enslaved people. In many ways, America's economy might not have grown in the ways that it did without this source of labor. The South's agriculture spurred the North to create businesses and factories to do things like process cotton. The rest of the world also depended on the cotton harvested in the South. By the 1840s, 60% of the world's cotton industry and 70% of Europe's textile industry relied on the cotton grown in the southern United States. Once again, wealthy white landowners made a profit at the expense of others, in this case, the enslaved African Americans. A massive advance in industry and technology known as the Industrial Revolution swept across America during the 1700s. This was a critical factor in the growth of American capitalism. Two economic classes arose from this: factory owners, also known as the capitalist elites, and workers, known as the proletariat. The factory owners became very wealthy, and the workers remained working-class Americans. Again, capitalism benefited a specific group of people while leaving out the majority of the population. Soon after the Civil War ended, America abolished slavery. However, African Americans continued to be persecuted within our system. America has worked for many decades to remove barriers for African Americans, but we still have yet to achieve this. Again, our capitalistic system failed a group of people, but our country continues to work to repair these mistakes and toward building a better and more equitable country. The Gilded Age from the late 1800s to the early 1900s was a time of rapid industrialism and big business in America. Our economy was growing rapidly, wages increased by 48%, and America started to establish global economic power. Although it was a major step in our progress as a country, some people, known as robber barons and captains of industry, began to exploit the rise of big business. This resulted in a monumental income gap. Even with the increase in wages, the richest 4,000 families had nearly the same amount of wealth as the other 11.6 million families combined. In order to combat these inequities, the Progressive Era began.
The Progressive Era was a time of government reform in America from the late 1890s to the early 1920s. Multiple acts and laws were introduced to combat the issues of inequity that began during the Gilded Age. The Great Depression was the biggest economic crash in U.S. history. When the stock market began to crash in 1929, the banks that were overly invested in the stock market had to sell all of their holdings at a loss. As the depression got worse, people began to scramble to banks to take out their money, but the banks didn't have their money, and this led to a severe economic crash. It was exacerbated by the lack of government regulations. Many Americans suffered severely, lost their homes and their jobs. The 2008 recession was the biggest economic downturn since the Great Depression. It began in 2007 when the government failed to regulate the finance industry. The Federal Reserve cut interest rates after 9/11, so people and corporations began to borrow money from banks excessively. Banks were giving out loans and mortgages freely, disregarding any credit risks. The shadow banking system failed because they were taking on too much risk. This includes hedge funds, private equity firms, investment banks, etc., which affected the flow of credit to consumers and businesses. Inflation skyrocketed, so the feds increased interest rates again, which led to people not being able to afford their loans. People rapidly began selling everything they had loans on, leading to the collapse of many banks. Here we are in May of 2023. Inflation is rising, the government has almost hit the max debt limit, 3 banks have collapsed since March, and the Federal Reserve has been increasing interest rates. Top economists are not able to predict if we're going to enter a recession or just scrape past one. We are now facing a new set of challenges as we move forward. Will the government enact reforms and create new legislation to improve this situation? And at whose expense this time?
America has a problem.
I speak tonight for the dignity of man and the destiny of democracy. It is wrong, deadly wrong, to deny any of your fellow Americans the right to vote in this country.
Democracy, a system of government that allows all citizens, regardless of race or gender, the right to participate in free and fair elections, giving power to the people. In 1776, 56 men signed a document claiming all men were created equal, but who did they leave out? The suffrage movement was a decades-long fight to guarantee women the right to vote. The movement began in the mid-19th century and didn't pass until 1920, when the 19th Amendment, which guaranteed women the right to vote, was ratified. The movement was led by famous historical women figures, such as Elizabeth Cady Stanton, Susan B. Anthony, Lucy Stone, Henry Blackwell, Frances E.W. Harper, Abigail Scott Duniway, and many others.
Abigail Scott Duniway So she was from Illinois. She suffered greatly and really understood westward expansion, right? So then she gets to Oregon and she decided that wow, this is really important. We really need to have a women's right to vote, women's right to be involved, because here she had a handicapped husband. And so she did a lot herself. And then all of a sudden found wow, I don't have the ability to do the things I want to do. So she decided her strategy was to go into newspaper. So on her own, she founded her own newspaper, and she widespread the philosophy and her thinking through this newspaper. And she is the one that helped secure Idaho's right to vote as well as Oregon's.
People went about guaranteeing women the right to vote through various tactics. Some focused on protests, such as picketing, silent vigils, hunger strikes, marches, and various other forms of protests, while others focused directly on the court and legislation side of things. While white women were now guaranteed the right to vote, people of color were still fighting for equal voting rights in America. After the Civil War, Reconstruction brought hope to Black Americans. The 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments came out of Reconstruction. One of these amendments, the 15th, gave Black American men the right to vote. However, in the segregated South, Jim Crow laws were put in place to prevent Black Americans from exercising the right to vote. One of these was poll taxes, which were essentially voting fees. Grandfather clauses could exempt low-income white Americans from paying if they had ancestors who had cast votes before the Civil War. However, this obviously didn't include Black Americans and made it almost impossible for the poor Black Americans to vote. Black Americans who tried to vote were often faced with violence, rendering voting even more difficult. All these measures that were put in place to prevent Black Americans from voting were largely successful, and made voting for Black Americans almost impossible, even after the passing of the 15th Amendment. But Black Americans were going to fight back. 100 years later, the Civil Rights Movement gains momentum as Black Americans are still fighting for equal voting rights and an end to voter suppression. Black Americans were taking a stand.
Until brotherhood is more than a meaningless word at the end of a prayer, but the first order of business on every legislative agenda, let us march on ballot boxes.
Many activists like Martin Luther King, Fannie Lou Hamer, Malcolm X, John Lewis, Rosa Parks, and others played an important role in the Civil Rights Movement. During the Civil Rights Movement, people would protest by having sit-ins, where Black Americans, mainly students, would go to white-only lunch counters and refuse to leave, even when refused service. There were also bus boycotts. The Montgomery bus boycott was a 13-month mass protest that began after Rosa Parks' arrest in 1955. It was a turning point in the Civil Rights Movement. Finally, the Civil Rights Act of 1964 banned discrimination of race and sex. However, it did not ban voters' discrimination, so protests continued. The Southern Christian Leadership Conference, led by Martin Luther King Jr., and the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee continued to push for federal action against voter suppression. Later, in 1965, civil rights activists held a protest in Selma, Alabama, that resulted in police brutality and is known as Bloody Sunday.
They came with horses. They came with nightsticks. And I was standing and people were running because they were beating me. I did not run, so he hit me at the base of my neck. And I became unconscious.
Bloody Sunday triggered a national outcry, and 8 days later, President Lyndon Johnson sent a Voting Rights Act to Congress. The Voting Rights Act was passed on August 6, 1965.
The struggle for the right to vote has been a long, hard, tedious struggle to redeem the soul of America. And the struggle is not over. We're still trying to build a true democracy in our country to let every citizen have a voice in the political process.
Gaining equal voting rights in America was a long and difficult journey, and is still ongoing today. There have been many legislations proposed to expand voting rights and encourage more participation in our democracy. But there has also been legislation proposed to restrict voting rights, potentially making it harder again for minorities to participate in democracy.
Democracy is something that has allowed for us to be able to have, hopefully, when it's working well, equal rights under the law, which is our Constitution and our Bill of Rights. But it is not a perfect system, and it's something that we need to work on and fight for all the time. So democracy is our ability to try to live life as equally with the same opportunities and the ability to earn a living, have the type of love and life and care that should be afforded to everybody the same. But we obviously know that a human condition in democracy isn't perfect and needs work all the time. So hopefully a democracy is something where there are freedoms and the ability to take responsibility over caring for each other. But that does take work, and it also takes empathy and kindness and a willingness to be able to make sure that those that are the lesser of us have the same kind of ability to rise up as anyone else, and that is what my definition of a true democracy should look like.
Sometimes you gotta close the door to open a window.
Safety is a state in which hazards and conditions leading to physical, psychological, or material harm are controlled in order to preserve the health and well-being of individuals and the community.
I think safety is an American value, really at the root of everything that we do. When we talk about any sort of freedom or individual rights, really the premise of that concept is the ability to be safe, whether it's safety from others or in other cases safety from our government. I think it really is the root of what it means to be an American.
Safety in America is a core value in our society. Police officers are the people that are supposed to uphold this value, but questions have been raised about policing and safety by citizens in our country. Are they doing their jobs, or are they abusing their power? The origins of our modern-day police force date back to 1704 during the time of slavery in the United States.
Slavery is the ownership of a person as property, especially when it comes to that person's labor. Enslaved people are forced to work against their will with no pay, and often demeaning, violent, and deadly conditions. Early in the history of modern America, hundreds of thousands of captured Africans were transported to the United States and enslaved by white landowners who were in need of people to work their tobacco and cotton fields. These enslaved people lived in sheds and were forced to work sunup to sundown 6 days a week. They were only given food scraps that were nearly inedible and were whipped and beaten by what would become the first police officers, the Slave Patrol. The Slave Patrol's members consisted of civilians who regulated slave activities for pay. Unlike constables or sheriffs who had some non-policing activities, slave patrols operated with the sole purpose of the oppression of slaves.
Following the war, they were replaced by militia-style groups who were meant to control and deny access to equal rights to freed slaves. In 1779, the word police entered the English language. Jeremy Bentham, an English philosopher, made the distinction: police keep the peace, justice punishes order. The first police department was established in 1845 in New York, along with New Orleans and Cincinnati.
Between 1840 and the 1920s, mobs, vigilantes, and law officers, including the Texas Rangers, lynched some 500 Mexicans and Mexican Americans and killed thousands more, not only in Texas, but also in territories that became the states of California, Arizona, Nevada, Utah, Colorado, and New Mexico. The importance of police as enforcers had started to spiral out of control, and racism began to become significantly apparent in police systems.
Racism had been a major factor in America, as Jim Crow laws were introduced in 1877. During the Progressive Era, modern policing grew harsher and the number of police grew too. Segregation took its toll in the country, and police officers were known as the bad guys, as many events took place that related to racism and police brutality. In 1917, police patrolled black neighborhoods and arrested black people disproportionately. Blacks made up 13% of the population, but 27% of those were incarcerated.
30 years later, in the 1950s, minorities in America had commenced the civil rights movement, which were peaceful protests against Jim Crow laws. The protests were led by Dr. Martin Luther King Jr.
We will be able to work together, to pray together, to struggle together, to go to jail together, to stand up for freedom together, knowing that we will be free one day.
Officers beat, arrested, and killed these protesters. At one point, they were even given military-grade weapons to fight against these harmless objectors. During this time, safety for all citizens was not valued whatsoever.
Tape obtained by Channel 5 News shows what appears to be a group of LAPD officers beating a suspect.
History, began to arrive out of that night.
We have to be willing to stand up and say, no, we know what we see and we know what we experience, and we demand a transformation, a reimagination of how we do public safety in Los Angeles and around the country.
I mean, please, we can get along here. We all can get along.
On March 3, 1991, Rodney King was brutally beaten by a group of police officers. This incident was filmed by a bystander from a balcony across the street. This video marked the first police brutality that was filmed. The video spread rapidly across the three primary networks that dominated the news cycles in the 1990s. This opened the eyes to all of America and showed everyone what was actually going on with the police, the people who were supposed to keep us safe. Minorities turned angry and riots broke out. This was the moment African Americans and other minorities heard and wanted change.
These BLM protests have caused America to force our government and police systems to make improvements as far as racial inequality and discrimination. Safety for all was and still is our number one priority.
Safety to me at the end of the day means striking a balance between not being hyper vigilant, not being scared or afraid of everything. And really for me, I think what it is having an autonomy, an awareness of what is going on. We have systemically criminalized communities of color, whether you look at slavery, the black codes, Jim Crow laws, the war on drugs. I mean, we can go on and on and on. And obviously, we have gotten so much better than where we were. We're just at a different point. We are starting to have conversations, and in a lot of states, it is mandatory to have that internal bias training.
America is finally making systemic progress, as the annual police killings have gone down 61%, as well as crime rates and murder rates. The Black Lives Matter movement had been highly effective over the past decade. It normalized body cam footage on police officers, and it has largely shifted the public opinion.
After all of these unfortunate events, America is learning from our mistakes, and safety is finally becoming more valued in our country. Our nation is making systemic progress.
This is America. Don't catch you slipping now. Don't catch you slipping now. Look what I'm whipping now. This is America. Don't catch you slipping now. Don't catch you slipping now.
I long to hear that you have declared independence. And by the way,
the new code of laws, which I suppose it will be necessary for you to make,
I desire you to remember the ladies and be more generous and favorable to them than your ancestors.
Do not put such unlimited power into the hands of the husband. Remember, all men would be tyrants if they could. If particular care and attention is not paid to the ladies, we are determined to foment a rebellion and will not hold ourselves bound by any laws in which we have no voice or representation.
that was Remember the Ladies, a letter written by Abigail Adams to her husband John Adams on March 31st, 1776. But the ladies were not remembered. Instead, it took 150 years before women won the right to vote in 1920. The Declaration of Independence promised liberty and justice for all. But how has justice for all been upheld?
Poorly. How's that for a straight answer? I'm going to stick to the poorly. We continue to struggle. We're just struggling in a different way. I think that women are now using their voices more than ever, which is the only way that change is going to happen.
The very first Women's Rights Convention took place in Seneca Falls, New York on July 19, 1848. It was a giant step towards justice, led by women fighting for the social, civil, and religious rights of women.
The right of citizens of the United States to vote shall not be denied or abridged by the United States or by any state on the account of race, color, or previous condition of servitude.
mean, half of the population had no voice in the governance of the country.
August 18th, 1920. Ratification of the 19th Amendment declaring the right of citizens of the United States to vote shall not be denied or abridged by the United States or by any state on account of sex.
It's the first time you could say that our democracy included all of our citizens.
It liberated a lot of women. That made them brave. And they did a better job at moving on and educating their children.
May 9th, 1960. The FDA approved the first commercially produced birth control pill in the world. June 10th, 1963. President John F. Kennedy signed into law the Equal Pay Act, prohibiting sex-based wage discrimination. July 2nd, 1964. President Lyndon B. Johnson signs the Civil Rights Act into law, which bans employment discrimination based on race, religion, national origin, or sex. June 23rd, 1972. President Richard Nixon signed into law the Education Amendment, which states, "No person in the United States shall, on the basis of sex, be excluded from participation in or be denied the benefits of or be subjected to discrimination under any education program or activity receiving federal financial assistance." January 22nd, 1973.
Is the decision of the United States Supreme Court. It handed down a historic decision about abortion. The court said in a 7-2 decision that in the first 3 months of pregnancy, only the woman and her physician may decide whether she may have an abortion. In the second 3 months, all the state may do is regulate abortion procedures.
The court overturned nearly 50 years of abortion precedents in a ruling that was a first. Never before has the court granted and then taken away a widely recognized constitutional right.
In 1923, the National Women's Political Party proposed the Equal Rights Amendment as a way to supply legal equality for women. 4 decades later, in 1960, the amendment was introduced to Congress, and by March of 1972, the U.S. Senate approved the amendment. But by the mid-1970s, ratifications of the Equal Rights Amendment failed. Since then, the amendment has been revisited over and over again, but has never had sufficient congressional votes to pass. The most recent example of this was on April 27, 2023, when the U.S. Senate was 9 votes short of what was needed to ratify the Equal Rights Amendment Act.
That's really upsetting.
The fact that that hasn't.
I feel like it
gotten
was
passed now.
almost we were more advanced 100 years ago at this point.
Our rights have never been free of controversy and have, never been the responsibility of the courts alone.
If particular care and attention is not paid to the ladies, we are determined to foment a rebellion and will not hold ourselves bound by any laws in which we have no voice or representation.
the beginning of time, humans have admired birds' ability of flight. The wondrous thought of being able to go anywhere, anytime within hours or minutes inspired many minds, including Leonardo da Vinci's. Based on studies of bird wings, Leonardo da Vinci made the first real studies of flight and sketches of flight machines in the 1480s. Fascinated, he drew up multiple types of flying machines. His most famous were the ornithopter and the aerial screw. It wasn't until 1903 that flight was successful, and it's all due to the dedication of Orville and Wilbur Wright. The study was a dangerous and often fatal project, but the Wright brothers didn't give up. With great patience and much trial and error, they finally achieved the world's first manned flight in Kitty Hawk, North Carolina.
Man's age-old dream of flight becomes a reality.
News of the first successful flight quickly spread. America knew that harnessing the power of flight would give the country an edge in transportation and military power, so the building and flying of planes rapidly became a top priority. Before air travel, traveling by boat and vehicle took weeks, months, and even sometimes up to a year to get to your destination. American entrepreneurs founded the first commercial passenger service airline, the St. Petersburg Tampa Air Boat Line, in Florida in 1913. By 1920, most of the world had adopted commercial airline services. The number of frequent airline passengers grew from roughly 6,000 in 1930 to a whopping 500,000 in 1934. Not only had America provided the most advanced way of travel, but had used aviation to their advantage in the military. In 1915, the first aircraft equipped with machine guns was made, leading to the establishment of the U.S. Air Service in 1918. The U.S. Air Service was a big advantage for our country. America's military power practically doubled. By the start of World War II, America and Britain dominated the skies with air power. Tactical skills including air bombing, air warfare, and defending ground troops were crucial to America's Allied victory in World War II. America's skills and power in aviation only grew from there. Currently, we have 13,247 aircraft in our military force. That is 9,000 more than the closest leading country, Russia. In the span of a mere 108 years, America directly changed how we travel and how we fight wars.
One of the world's most closely guarded secrets, the atomic bomb process was developed in widely separated areas. Even the thousands of men and women working on the project had no idea of the staggering energy they were to release.
It is an atomic bomb. It is a harnessing of the basic power of the universe. We shall destroy their docks, their factories, and their communications. We have spent more than $2 billion on the greatest scientific gamble in history, and we have won. What has been done is the greatest achievement of organized science in history.
Coming out of World War II, America, as the only country with nuclear weapons, capitalized on the fear and power and stepped into its burgeoning role as a world superpower.
This is Martin Cooper, making the very first mobile phone call on April 3, 1973 with the Dynatac 8000X. The phone call was made in New York to their rising rival Joe Engel, executive at AT&T. The world was completely altered by the introduction of the mobile phone, and the ability to call anyone, anywhere, anytime worldwide was revolutionary.
When I was in college in 1998, there was one kid in my entire school that had a cell phone. And I remember all of us were like, wow, that's super convenient. I would love to have a cell phone.
The real craze started in 2007 when Apple released its first smartphone. It had a touchscreen, downloadable apps, a camera, and more storage space than ever before. From 2007 to 2021, Apple sold 2.6 billion smartphones.
I think we were definitely ahead of the game in that regard. We couldn't imagine what a cell phone or a smartphone would be like back when they came out. It was just basically a phone, and now, you have every answer to every question in the world in your pocket.
5 billion cell phones in the world. 40 years ago tonight, there was only one. Looking back, how did we ever stay in touch? How did we ever manage?
Looking ahead, technology will continue to hold a prominent place in the lives of future generations. Using and learning from what we have accomplished through history is key to American success. New technology is still constantly being developed. If 20 years ago we thought of an entire population owning mobile phones was insane, can you imagine how we will feel in 20 years' time about the next big invention?
American innovations have been a driving force in shaping the world as we know it today, and will undoubtedly continue to shape our future. These pivotal inventions changed lives across the globe in history and through present times. Moving forward, we have many promising inventions and enhancements in the foreseeable future. Here is a glimpse into the possibilities. We may take flight to the next level and have a space race to Mars.
Using AI, robots could perform surgeries and operate machinery.
Instead of weapons, nuclear power may be used as a clean and reliable energy source.
Your phone may no longer be an object, and rather a holographic device or a pair of programmed contact lenses.
Humans' lifespan could be extended.
Vehicles, planes, and other means of travel could be completely non-human operated.
And much, much more that we cannot yet fathom. America is a country that stands proudly by its inventions and strives to continue changing lives across the globe. With the backbone of technology we have now, what will be our next world-shaping creation?
Looking out a dirty old window, down below the cars in the city go rushing by. I sit here alone and I wonder why. Friday night and everyone's home. I can feel the heat, but it's soothing heading down. I search for the beat in this dirty town. Downtown, the young ones are going. Downtown, the young ones are growing. We're the kids in America. Whoa. We're the kids in America. Whoa. Everybody live.
America. Vive America. Laugh America. Laugh America.